You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in the show are those of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. Join us as we discuss those topics and more, free from the ideologies of religion and superstition.
All right, hello and welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour. As usual, the show is put together by members of FreeThought Fort Wayne, a chapter of the American Humanist Association. To get in touch with us, our email is fortwayneaha@gmail.com, or our Facebook page is facebook.com/FreeThoughtFW. Today, we have an interesting conversation. Just to present the host, this is me, V. We have Caleb, we have D, and we have Chris. And we're going to talk about religious education in schools. And I think we're going to mainly talk about high schools because that's where I think it matters the most. I think college is not really that important. So, with that said, what do you guys think about the religious education in high schools?
What kind of religious education? Are you talking about like a general class on different types of religion, or incorporating a doctrine into the lesson plans?
Well, I guess, both are, there's very big distinction between those two kinds of education. And, I'm pretty sure most of us will be okay with one of those and not okay with the other. So we really should discuss both of those types of religious education. And I would even throw in there just general, when you have a sports game and they have a prayer before or after the game. I mean, that's kind of a form of religious education almost. You're endorsing religious behavior in a school kind of thing. So even that is not off topic, in my opinion, in this conversation.
Yeah.
So
there's already religion in school, then, for sure. Would you guys say that there's religion being taught in school already, in one way or another?
Honestly, I don't think I ever remember being taught anything religious in school, quite frankly. I mean, the only thing I could think of that comes close is when I learned about ancient history. And so I learned about the Egyptians and their gods, the ancient Greeks and their gods. But I never learned about any of the modern religions. Actually, you know what? I can... Okay, so I did take a class in high school. It was an elective. And it was sociology, I believe. But part of this class, half of this class for half of the semester, was dedicated to the he was educating the students on foreign culture, but it wasn't necessarily like a religious thing. It was just a culture thing. But sometimes you would talk about religion through that. But I mean, I've never really been in any sort of religion class before.
Yeah, me either.
Guys? My high school wasn't in the U.S., so I can't really speak for high schools here. But in the Eastern European country of Bulgaria that I'm from, we never had any kind of religious education whatsoever. Like, the topic was never really brought up, other than in passing in like history class or something.
Do you feel like you benefited from that, or do you feel like you're a little worse off for it?
I don't know. In a way, I wish I had a little more knowledge about some of the doctrines. I mean, I've picked up a lot of it along the way, but maybe it would have helped me drop my religion sooner if I had known about some of that stuff.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why the internet is killing religion. It just exposes people to all these other religions out there. And once you see how silly they are, and then look, it makes you kind of realize, this whole talking snake thing or a talking donkey is pretty silly. So I'm right there with you. I think that we should be having some sort of mandatory theology class of some sort. I think it would be good to have a class dedicated to the facts about religions around the world.
That would be an interesting class. It would be a class all about how dumb religion is. And it would almost be a total waste of time. Maybe,
but I'd be careful. I'd be careful.
I think it's relevant, though, because this is still a huge relevant force in the world. So and it's literally everywhere. It's inescapable. And so I think it'd be better to know, to at least have some expectations, to be able to walk in there with at least some understanding of what it might be like to have a conversation with a Hindu or a Buddhist or whatever. Plus, if you are these religions, like he was saying, it's good to help you drop to quit. It's good. I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop talking.
No, I was gonna say, it's important to know these things. I mean, religion certainly influences society. I mean, imagine how different it would be if basically everybody that graduated high school in the U.S. had a basic understanding of the difference between, let's say, Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. How many conflicts there are in the Middle East and other places where such distinction plays a huge role. It would help everyone understand better all that. So I'd be careful not to call it a theology class, though. It should be more like, religious education or like religious history or, something to that extent. Theology, to me, has more of a connotation where it goes towards more towards indoctrination, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's important to understand, what their perspective is. Just knowing the facts about religion, is useful, absolutely. But to really get an understanding of their perspective would help us interact with them better, I think.
I think what you're suggesting is a religious debate class.
Oh, actually, when you say it like that, it does sound pretty terrible.
Yeah. So I think religious
kids
studies
just debate religion all day. That'd be silly.
I think religious studies class is a little more appropriate because that does kind of promote impartiality and the the actual studying of the facts, like you were saying.
Yeah, but like I almost wonder if you had a class called religious arguing or religious debate class, at least you'd be honest about it, and you'd have people going in there thinking that they're going to convince people, and then you just have this thing going on, and then maybe it might lead to some critical thinking, possibly. I don't know if that might be too much to ask for.
It's just that really is too much to ask for. There's a lot of people who would be on the tips of their toes, just waiting to hear the parent complaints from that class.
Well, here's the
but if you chose,
it's a PR nightmare.
So let's say we call it religious studies, so we make everybody happy. But so who would teach that class? When they're talking about Islam, is it appropriate to bring, let's say, somebody like and I don't know what the word is, but like a Islamic priest to go over the doctrines of Islam so that they're properly presented? Or should we have maybe a historian or somebody that has a degree in religious studies that would be more neutral on the subject?
Well,
you can't win this. I was going to say you can't win that battle, because even if you have somebody who comes in to represent, say, Christianity in general, you have an infinite amount of sects of people in that religion, and they are going to argue about how this one person represented them, which is not what they believe. And it may just be the minorest of things, but these minor things are the things that define a whole sect of a particular religion. So, man, it wouldn't work even that way, would it? That's my opinion, at least.
No, that's a good point.
Well, I don't know. When you break it down, you basically have every sect of Islam being considered a terrorist. So,
right.
That's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. See, I don't know how I feel about that particular issue, which is a whole nother issue. But like my cousin Sean, for example, man, he really pushes my buttons. He really broaches that limit of my tolerance. He always talks about, he's very anti-Muslim. It goes to the extreme. He's not just anti-Islam. He's anti-Muslim. He don't care what kind of, how good of a person you are. All that matters is that label to him. And he's even going so far as to go into just even normal everyday Joe Blows that are, maybe 3 or 4 generational Americans. He don't care. Yeah. And I think that level of extremity could be remedied with an education, because he doesn't know anything. I've questioned him on some of this, and he's so frustrated that he doesn't know the answers that he just doesn't even bother with it anymore. He just ignores it altogether at this point.
Does he realize that people like Muhammad Ali were Muslim, and he's like such an icon in the United States? You have to be able to separate the person from the belief system of some extremist. I mean, it would be the same thing as identifying all Christians as like the Westboro Baptist Church that go and protest at, funerals of soldiers and screaming, "Thank God for dead soldiers." You can't do that. I mean, there's certainly, we got to recognize the bad apples, but, let's not generalize it to that extent. Everyone is bad. That's just not true.
Yeah, but I mean, we understand that. Yeah. But I mean, if we can convince somebody about that, then we can probably talk them out of religion in general.
Yeah.
Like, how do you bridge that gap? I mean, it seems to me like the whole religious studies thing, that could be an elective, but what we really need is just general critical thinking taught as like a primary focus of school, like almost like screw math, English, throw it all out and start with critical thinking at the base and then build everything onto that, foundation. But I mean, I'm not an educator. I don't know. But if you do that, I think that would cut out a vast majority of religion just naturally.
What is the paradigm? Like, what is education based on right now? Because what you're saying, I absolutely agree with that. We should be creating our curriculum. I think we should be creating a curriculum around that, not just a single class.
Oh, I agree. That should be the point of education, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, is that not the point now, and we're just not meeting that goal, or is there a different point that I'm not getting?
No. Well, I think that they say it in word, but they don't actually practice it, because I think what happens is when you get too close to critical thinking and the idea of questioning everything, and keeping an open mind, it always comes too close to religion. So they have to keep a long, a big stretch between the two topics. You can talk about critical thinking and introduce it, but it can only be used in these closed circumstances of math, but not to actual life. It's, in all of its vagaries. I don't know. That's just the way it seems to me.
I think you can build a curriculum such that, it would build up to that in a way. I mean, you could start out with, critical thinking on like a, tooth fairies, goblins kind of level. And then, over time kind of work your way up to the philosophical questions. Why are we here? Why is there something rather than nothing? And those questions will inevitably come up. So then you can, bring it up that way.
Yeah.
And you could do this in a secular manner. And, you can kind of brace them for this over the curriculum of their 12-year tenure there.
You just need to get an atheist or a skeptic in the Secretary of Education position.
Well, a skeptic is the right word there. You don't have to be an atheist. A skeptic is the right word there.
You're absolutely right about that.
I was listening to an interview with Lawrence Krauss, and he was talking about how we teach science the wrong way in schools. especially in high schools, we teach science as if it's, this gathering of facts, and we're just going to pour those facts into kids' minds, and they're going to have to apply them in this rigid fashion to get to the right answer. And, that's the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
He's arguing more for let's start at the basics of the scientific method, the exploration, how do you reach from a set of facts to that conclusion in this kind of skeptical, rational manner. And if we teach kids how to apply it in science and in all those different subjects, then this will inevitably permeate through all aspects of life. Anytime they learn something new, they'll be able to apply these skeptical tools and these this very methodological approach to starting with some facts and going towards a theory or some kind of explanation of this set of facts that can then be used more broadly, as science always tries to do.
Yeah, but that's exactly why they don't do it. Right.
You're probably right. Yeah.
So I'm going to interject here. I actually just briefly left the room to grab a piece of paper, which perfectly applies to your situation, since now I am an employee of Fort Wayne Community Schools and work in a high school setting. I actually have this nifty little picture. This picture is the depth of knowledge levels that we are expected to employ in the classroom. Now, with level 1, we basically are expected to have the kids learn how to memorize, rote memorization. So if we ask them to define something, that's kind of rote memorization. Level 2 is trying to apply that concept. So telling them to describe the cause and effect that's kind of going on there. And then level 3, we start reaching strategic thinking, where we ask them to critique or maybe draw a hypothesis or a conclusion. So trying to take that application one step further. And then we have level 4, which is extended thinking, which asks them to truly analyze and apply the concepts to synthesize something new or design something new with those ideas in mind. So these are kind of the depth of knowledge levels that are applied through the entire district of Fort Wayne Community Schools and are expected to be employed in the classroom on a regular basis.
How's that working out? What's your opinion of how that's
working? Exactly.
It seems to be one of the newest things that they're trying to do in order to encourage some of these higher levels of thinking, in order to try to get kids to understand how to use critical thinking and how to apply them to the various topics. Being a new thing, we really don't have much data on the level of success. But it's at least awesome that it's being employed and that it's trying to be monitored, as I am visited every week by at least one person who is evaluating my performance based on what I'm doing from those depth of knowledge levels.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I had never learned this before. I don't know. There's something, do you see anything in that system that could be amended or maybe something to add to it?
No, I really,
knowing what you know? Because you understand the system far better than I do.
Knowing what I know, I think I'm correct. I think that a conversation I had with another teacher or a few is correct in defining and outlining the problem. Because part of my problem right now is that I'm not moving at the pace I would like to be. And that's because the students that are coming to me are incredibly lacking in their prior knowledge that they should have before getting into my class. And so we sat down and tried to analyze why this was. And we had some ideas thrown around that perhaps it's centered around this notion that you really just kind of need to pass the kid on to get them to high school.
Wow.
If they are lacking skills that they kind of need in sixth grade teachers, administrators, whatever, are kind of pressured by the parents to pass their kid on to the 7th grade.
Well, isn't it true that you can't hold a kid back anymore? in Fort Wayne community schools?
There is some truth to that, funny enough. Whether one way or another, there is some truth to that.
So a kid could actually go all the way through school, through high school, and be totally uneducated.
The problem is once they hit high school. That's when the problem really starts, because that's when we have set limits, and we really do have some hard walls that they can hit. And that's when they resort to streets and crime, and that's how they end up at my particular installation.
Wow.
Yeah.
So would you say that these children just aren't being challenged enough by the time they get to you? I mean, you're saying that these kids are so just unaware of the knowledge that they need to
They're being held to loose standards that aren't really requirements but more suggestions, which is kind of crap in my opinion.
So, can we just play a little thought experiment here and imagine we did hold every student up to high standards? What would that kind of education look like? Not what is being taught, but what happens to the kids who can't hold the standard, and how many of them would there be? Like, what do we do with all those kids?
So yes, you would absolutely see the re-expansion of resource and special ed classrooms, because you've seen a dramatic shrink in them in recent years, as everybody has been pressured to treat every kid as a general education student.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. So they've been basically defunding, at least there's no money. Like, why is education not like, we should have the best buildings in schools? I mean, we've got so much money we spend on stuff.
Where I'm at right now, they used to have 6 resource teachers. Now they have 1, just to give you an idea. And that's only happened in 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
I was listening to it was a politician a while back that was talking about the salaries that teachers get, and that's one thing that, just the salaries in education are so low that it doesn't really attract many people. And the journalist was arguing that they should increase the salaries of teachers in order to attract better talent, to retain people more, all these things. And the guy's answer was that they didn't need to do that because teachers don't go into teaching for the money.
God.
Well, that was a twisted logic if I've ever heard any.
Well, I mean, you want a teacher who goes into teaching because they love it, but you want money to be a part of it too. I mean, you should pay them for you want somebody who loves it to come in there and teach your kids.
Yeah. Well, if you look at I don't know if any of you have tracked the Muncie situation, but there is a real messed up situation going on down there, to where their school system just totally jacked up their finances. I can't even remember the real figure. It was like $11 million. They jacked it up.
Wow.
And so they were cutting, they were killing schools, they were shutting off heating in the schools, they were starting to look at chopping teachers and chopping teacher wages. They even went so far as to try to enact a measure that would cut each teacher's pay by 20% and have them give their last 2 paychecks back to the administration.
Wow.
Like, who does that? Who requests that of their teachers? Like, that's ridiculous.
They must.
I don't know how you can
expect
that from somebody.
Well, they must be in such a terrible situation. Like, what do you do?
It's just, it's crazy. It's crazy. So literally,
well, who's getting that money? I mean, is that going to their union, or is that going to the state? I mean, who's getting that money?
Yeah. So
what's going on with that?
Comes down to the administration, who couldn't balance a checkbook. Basically, don't understand how that falls to the teacher's fault. But so luckily they've been trying to get some loans from the state to try to compensate, get some grants and such. So it looks like the damage to the teachers are going to be very minimal. But it's still just like, how can things just spiral out of control like that? It's just insane.
Yeah, the damage to the teachers not so bad, but they're going to go into debt for $11 million just to cover the hole. Like, what does that really do? It just pushes the problem further away.
But it's affecting things like that. Budget concerns are affecting people up here in Fort Wayne. right now, don't know how much you guys have been tracking Trump's appointments to some of these different positions, but he appointed to the Secretary of Education a lady who is very pro-voucher. Vouchers,
Right,
private
yeah.
school, charter school, whatever. Yeah. These voucher programs are strangling all of the public schools here in Fort Wayne. Strangling us to death. We don't even know what the funding situation is right now. We don't even know if there's going to be a school this fall.
Wow. Jeez.
So let me ask you this real quick.
Because all these funds, millions of dollars worth, are going to these private schools here in town and these voucher programs that should be going to Fort Wayne community schools.
Well, let me ask you this. Maybe I heard this from another teacher that's very interesting. What they said was that like a month after basically the school year starts, they have an influx of students from those private schools. They go back to the public schools.
Yeah.
But the funds stay with the private school. So that doubly screws the public schools.
The great part is about some of these private schools that do that, but they do that after they have used the student for what they needed. So just like what you were saying, that happens with normal students, but some of their key factors come down to special education students, because that brings in a lot more money. Go figure. So most of them end up getting sent to public school shortly after the school year starts. And also, after the sports season ends, that's when they send all the athletes back to public school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, go figure. So you're talking about football teams, baseball teams, basketball teams, whatever. They'll use them for the part of the school year in which they're doing the sports, and then afterwards, boot them.
How many of those schools are religious schools? Do we know?
I have no idea.
Of the private schools around Fort Wayne.
Around Fort Wayne, most of them are religious. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Wait, that
is crazy.
Well, my wife is a teacher, and she told me their pay was frozen for quite a while, for years, and a lot of the entry level as a teacher in Fort Wayne community schools isn't all that great, but you get like yearly raises. So if you stick around for a while, you generally are making decent money. But they were freezing those natural increases, so people were there for like 10 years with no increase in their wages. I mean,
there is no other job like that. There is no other job like that.
No,
you can be there 10 years with no increase.
Well, that actually happened at GM. They went 2008 to 2015 without seeing a raise.
Huh.
Well, didn't they have to be bought out too?
I'm sorry?
Didn't they have to be rescued or bought out?
Yeah, no, they paid back that debt within 3 or 4 years, I believe it was. The contract that they signed didn't expire in that amount of time. So we were stuck under Uncle Sam's boot for a while. And our union couldn't do anything about it. So they ended up freezing their wages for, I think it was like 9 years, something like that. It's stupid long. And that's unfortunate. And they just recently got their raises. And I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, I have a map over here that's from slate.com that shows where religious education is permitted in schools. And, it kind of has these dots on the map that shows where there's a school that, teaches some, like creationism or something, or it's a religious type of school that's taking government money. And there are some yellow dots in Indiana, and the yellow dots say that these are private schools that teach creationism and accept tax-funded vouchers or scholarships. Wow. For example, in Tennessee, they have a lot of green dots, and those are public schools in states where the law permits creationist instruction. Texas, for example, has a lot of these red dots, which the red means responsive ed charter schools using creationist curricula. I'm not sure what responsive ed charter school is, but basically it's some kind of charter schools that use creationism. So it's in a lot of different states.
I don't know. I don't necessarily feel that what goes on in private schools is any of my business. I mean, if I don't like it, that's the whole point. I mean, to be able to teach what you want to teach.
Yeah, I know, but it has such a terrible effect on society.
It does, really but I mean, I honestly think that it's unfortunate, but I think that Darwinism needs to take effect so that people can learn from this. They're not going to just accept the fact that this isn't going to work. They need to learn that this isn't going to work. I mean, it's just the way it is. So
and that's what it comes to, and that's really crappy, because basically what has to happen is public schools have to disappear in order for people to realize how nice it was to have a public school, because all these private schools are not held to any standards. Period. Yeah. In order to get that grant money for those vouchers and stuff, they don't have to adhere to any standard other than that student has to improve to some degree. Okay.
Yeah.
All you need is improvement. Whereas an actual public school has to meet certain standards. Like, oh, we have certain standards of graduation rates that we have to meet. Oh, we have certain standards of I-STEP scores we have to meet. Oh, we have certain standards of, whatever. We have standards that we have to meet in order to get that money. Private schools just have to show up and be like, hey, we're a private school. Give us money. And they're like, okay.
So why is there such a big push against it? I mean, why is so many people going into private schools? What's the drive?
It's all about misconception, which is so prevalent in American culture nowadays. Misconceptions are just killing this country from the inside out. And it really comes down to this belief that private school is better.
Yeah.
Because the public school is crappy. And you know what? Nowadays, public schools are getting crappier. I agree, because they're being strangled of all their funding because of all these voucher programs.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I was going to mention is it's interesting how the demise of these private colleges that were for-profit private colleges is coinciding with the rise of the private for-profit high schools.
Yep.
So basically, I have the feeling that people that got, that used to be in the college business, making money from there and scamming students, basically. That's why they had to close so many of these private schools, just because they were complete scams. I feel like they're now getting into the public education at the high school level, and they're trying to make their money there.
Yeah, and that's absolutely a great point, because, like I said, I mean, these people just get to commit murder and get away with it. It's insane to think about that, but that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and with those, private schools that are religious private schools, they end up taking government money for religious instruction. There's some, does that violate the church-state separation? I mean, you can certainly argue that we're paying government tax money for religious education.
Yeah. And
we don't allow it in public school, but we allow it in private school. Well, what's the difference?
Yeah. Well, I think if I don't know if this is the case, but if someday this does happen, the majority of students in this country switch to private and charter schools, I think the only thing that we could really do to combat that, and what we should be doing at the moment, if we're more of, not that we aren't, is just trying to infuse it into culture. This science, knowledge, reason, logic, everything. Just infuse it into the culture. Make it unavoidable to escape. I mean, it is somewhat inevitable. Like, I already think it's going to die. I think it's inevitable that religion's going away. But in the short term, to kind of boost that along, I think that would. I'm sorry.
How do we do that?
I think that would really help.
Now, give me an idea how to do that, Caleb. That makes me a believer.
Well, that's what we're doing.
So the radio show and this kind of stuff, yeah.
Well, and also pushing, for better science education in high schools. Kind of pushing for what Chris was mentioning earlier, those kind of critical thinking methods and those kind of things. That's what that's the only weapon we have is education. We're not going to use the tactics of the religious people to get to our goals.
Yeah, but I'm getting the impression from what you guys are telling me that we're losing this battle handily.
I don't know. So, I talked to a kid today at work. This dude is 23, right? Kind of a social guy. And I was just talking to him today, and he was just asking me. We were talking, and I asked him if he knew any of these names. I asked him if he knew Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Lawrence Krauss, William Lane Craig, on and on and on. I kept listing names. This kid never heard of any of these people. None. And it blew my mind. And that to me is just unfortunate. That tells me that the culture hasn't reached him at all. It's like how certain people have never heard of Christianity still. Those people still exist on this planet. That's how I kind of felt in that moment. Like, how do you not? It's like 23. I feel like he should at least know one of the names that I had listed.
Yeah,
but
I
totally oblivious.
The technology that we have now, the internet, which everybody's jacked in, provides a world of your choosing. People are not into this kind of stuff. There's plenty of stuff that they could get in their entire life and not even come close to it. Yeah. That's the way it seems. So I think there's a duty, I guess, of the public education system to do something about it, or to educate children. I don't know. This is a really frustrating topic.
Yeah,
it is. Well, it touches deep. It gets in there.
I actually just had a meeting today. That's why it's so ironic that this is the topic tonight. But I actually just had a conferencing today with the FWEA, which is the Fort Wayne Educators Association, I believe. And they brought up this issue that I was mentioning, how we don't even know what's going to happen this fall, just because of how the money's working out and how we may not have enough funding to do much of anything. And they're sitting here saying that, well, as far as things that we can do as teachers and as citizens, is we can go after the legislators, because they're inevitably the ones who permit this kind of stuff to happen. They're the ones permitting public schools to be choked to death by all these voucher programs. And what I just found out today was that there's even an online charter school that just got approved for 100% of the funding of millions of dollars. And it's like an online charter school, millions of dollars.
Can you
calculate
get the same money? But
right. Yeah. With zero overhead, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
all you need is an office building. You don't have to create classrooms. You don't have to create ramps for the kids with special needs. You don't have to serve lunch. None of that, and they still get all that money. That's insane.
And once again, they don't have to uphold to any standards, basically, and that just blows our minds as teachers. Like, we were to the verge of tears in just how much this does not make sense at all. And what this FWA association said for us to do was to go after the legislators. Go to the people who are voting on these things, who are making these bills and decisions that permit these voucher programs to be so well distributed and funded that it's choking public education to death.
What is public education like in a more secular culture? Does anybody have any experience with that or any knowledge on that topic?
A secular culture?
It's been a while for
Fort
me. I'm coming from another country where just none of that was at all in schools. And the thing is, with East Europe having transitions from communism to this to that, we didn't really have much in terms of private schools. I've heard that they're a little bit on the rise. There's a few more now, but they're a negligible percentage. They don't get funded with voucher programs or anything like that. As far as I know, maybe they've started, but while I was still there, you had to just straight up pay at the private school whatever tuition they asked for. But to me, at least, if we're going to have these kind of schools, they should have to adhere to 100% the same standards that a regular public school adheres to If not, then you don't get the money. And, if the student only stays there for 1/3 of the semester, you only get 1/3 of the money. If the money is going to follow the student, it's got to follow the student. That's what they're arguing for, and they should get that. But of course, they're not going to make their millions of dollars if they did that.
I mean, I hate to bring up Trump here, but we've got at least 4 more years of aggressively moving toward charter schools. I mean, that's going to set us back who knows how far. Oh God, this is very, very depressing topic, guys.
Well, but I think let me give Detroit as an example. These kind of private charter school, religious schools, stuff like that, became really popular in Detroit over the last few years, from what I understand. And people are realizing over in those areas that those schools are a disaster and that they are destroying the public education system. And I think there's a day here pretty soon that people are not going to be sending their kids to those schools. They're going to recognize the value of the public education system. And, it just sucks that we have to go through this period in order to get to that point. I mean, people are going to learn.
Well, I don't know. Do you not think that there will be secular private schools? I mean, to survive? I don't know. I'm kind of questioning where I lie on this because, quite frankly, like I said, I don't think it's any of my business what they should teach. And I'm wondering if maybe I don't know. Is it Rex? I'll ask you. Do you think it's possible to set a mandatory federal program? Regulation where it's tolerably within your standards, where everything they're allowed to do is tolerably within your standards.
Chris's personal standards?
Yeah. As not only as a teacher, but you personally. You're a teacher here, and I'm curious on your perspective here, because depending on because what I'm getting at is, because if there are private schools that can get this kind of money and have an amazing education, I think that those schools will survive any of this Darwinism, for lack of a better word. And I think that those schools would thrive. And I think that a private school, public schools rather, I think that as long as they maintain their stand, I don't know. I'm going to stop talking because this isn't my area. I'm sorry. Ignore that. You can scratch that from the record.
I don't know. I think you're actually trying to convince me to start up Rex High School. I like it. That's a good idea. Yeah, let's start my own private school. There we go. That's run just like a public school.
Well, that's the thing. Like, if you want a truly secular school, it's basically a public school.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Somebody actually threw out. Let me mention this, guys. This is actually really interesting. It was I think it was mentioned at one of the board meetings, or who mentioned it, said that we as a non-for-profit could actually create our own charter school and basically just turn around and hand it back to Fort Wayne community schools and tell them, hey, you do whatever you want. We'll let you do, as you please. And help them in that way. I don't know exactly what the logic behind it was, that they would help people somehow, but
you basically would get funding and then turn yourself into
we would basically just put our name on the letterhead and do nothing, kind of thing. Just turn it to the teachers at Fort Wayne community schools and sublet it to them and be like, okay, have fun with this.
I like it. I think I could see, my niece going to FreeThought High. I like that.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's good.
Maybe we could get together a coalition of secular educators, top of the field, get together and create a curriculum, K through 12. Make that a private. I'm serious. Make that a private school. I guarantee you there'll be some people willing to spend some money for that and wants to see how effective it is and how much it dominates the other religious ones. The private schools that are just secular in general might become more popular and more affordable over time. They'll just become more numerous.
So
they'll try to compete.
Well, I knew you sound pretty convinced that a secular school would outcompete any religious school.
Not necessarily, but one put together by in my fantasy scenario there, where it was like a coalition of the top educators in the country, secular, and that fantasy land, not my curriculum. No, I'm not putting together.
Well, no, not your personal curriculum.
Yeah.
No, for the first 2 years, it'd just be me teaching. That's how many students we would have.
And they would hate your guts. What do you got next? Gym class. Who's your teacher? Mr. Rex again. God, me too.
Yeah, I'd be getting the healthy teacher's paycheck that allows me to afford a Geo Metro or something incredibly crazy as a car.
Well, this was a point that I was going to bring up earlier. I've heard that the pay for private schools is a lot less than public schools. Is there any truth to that? Do you guys know?
When I was looking, my wife and I looked for schools for Devin, but I'm just talking elementary schools here, so I don't know about all the rest. Specifically kindergarten, or I'm sorry, preschool. I apologize, preschool. And the cheapest one, not the cheapest, but the school that we wanted that had the best ratings for the cost was a religious one. But we looked into their curriculum, and nothing that they teach is anything that I'm worried about. So I went ahead and went with that route. But the only reason I did that is because there wasn't a secular alternative, and it's unfortunate. That's the downside here. And I think that part of the problem is there's not enough like-minded individuals out there to be putting together secular private schools to compete.
Yeah, religious people are organized, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And pretty damn motivated too.
They would have to pay me 6 figures to work at a religious school, and that would just be to compensate for the weekly alcohol expenditure.
Well, I mean, when it's your immortal soul at stake, I think you're more likely to volunteer.
Yeah, God, what? It's hard to beat that in your benefit package.
Yeah, I mean, come on, service. Yeah, service to God. Yeah.
I mean, how much are you guys getting paid for this? I'm only getting like negative. Whatever it costs for wattage an hour. I think it's like 12 cents an hour or something.
Oh man.
Well, the pay I've heard is not as good for teachers in private schools, and that alone makes me think, well, people are drawn by money. It's definitely a motivator in the market. So how can you possibly have the best teachers there that make the least amount of money?
Honestly, part of that's driven by the fact that we have such great teacher unions for the public schools. Like, honestly, those people are real heroes, and that's part of who are down at the State House trying to rally for us, against some of these bills that are going to further cut public funding and further fund these voucher programs. So these people really are great and are doing outstanding things and trying to maintain jobs, maintain wages, and fight for those poor people in Muncie who are just between a rock and a hard place. Yeah, so they've been doing a great job. Indiana State Teachers Association, ISTA, I believe, are some of the people who are really heading that up, and they're pretty fantastic.
I mean, Muncie is not a poor area, though, right? Like, they shouldn't be in this kind of a crisis.
No, the reason why they're in that crisis is because of the rise of all the charter and private schools.
Oh. Yeah,
because of the drive to get those students to Ball State. That's exactly why.
Of course.
That is exactly why.
Well, I'm curious, how does their spending money on private school affect the money that's going into the public schools? Since doesn't that money come from taxes?
All that money comes from the state. And so when it gets allocated more so to the private schools than it does to the public schools, that's when they end up in a budget shortfall.
So there's state money going towards even the private schools even?
Yeah, these are state-funded vouchers. I'm sorry, I should have clarified. Yeah.
Okay.
So what directly subtract from the funding of the public school?
Yep, directly.
What's the situation here in Fort Wayne? Is there a lot of private school, like more private schools that are opening? Not private, public or charter schools that are opening in Fort Wayne, like within the last year or two?
I don't know about actual building ones. All I knew about was the new online one, which just got approved. Yeah.
Wow.
Because I know there were a couple that opened but then closed here in Fort Wayne, so I wasn't sure if they were being replaced by something or what was going on.
Well, there's another aspect of this debate that we haven't touched on. We have probably about no more than 6, 7, 8 minutes to discuss, guys, and it's in a little bit of a more direct education topic that I wanted to bring up. A lot of the fight for religion in school has focused on the teachings of evolution versus creationism. That's one example of a topic that has sparked multiple lawsuits. There's the famous Scopes monkey trial. There's Kitzmiller versus Dover. There's been other trials. What do you guys think of kind of some of those creationism or intelligent design theories and stuff like that? I mean, I'm pretty sure nobody here would like for that stuff to be taught in school, but
I think if so compelled, teach it in some sort of philosophy class, but there's no reason to bring it up in any sort of science class of any sort.
Yeah.
I honestly think you can talk more about Dr. Oz in a science class than you can about religion, and they're pretty much the same thing.
Well, and I think my personal experience with being a skeptic and critical thinking and all that is ultimately came down to whether or not I believed in creation or evolution. I mean, that is such a fundamental thing. If you believe that you're created, then you have a purpose and you are built a certain way and have a duty. If you believe in evolution, then you believe we've come from somewhere and that there's only something in the future that we build. I mean, there's a lot of implications to your foundational thinking on whether or not we're created or evolved.
That's where I really disagree with that, because honestly, when it comes to evolution, like, you realize the purpose of evolution is to have life, to be alive. Like, I don't see what greater purpose there is other than to be alive. I mean, that's what evolution is all about. It's all about being alive and maintaining that life. And so when you sit here and look at, oh, why am I here? Well, because you happen to be the strongest, the luckiest, the most fit, however you want to classify it. That's what you are. I mean, you should feel awesome, because there are millions and billions of forms of animals before you and your and your ancestors that didn't make it, but you did. So you should be so proud of yourself that you made it to this point, because so many other animals did not. I mean, I think that's a really special feeling, far more special than this idea that, oh, there's a magical being that designed me just to be me. Like, I don't think that's very special.
With all my problems.
Thank God. Yeah, exactly. I don't see that as special. I see that as delusional at best.
Yeah. Now, honestly, if it's the way that I kind of think about it is, if you can't prove that it's not superfluous, then it doesn't need to be in any sort of scientific context.
Well, an interesting case over here that I'm looking at on Wikipedia is Epperson v. Arkansas. And that was in 1968 when the United States Supreme Court invalidated an Arkansas statute that prohibited the teaching of human evolution in public schools. So as late as 68, human evolution in Arkansas was prohibited from even being taught in schools, and the Supreme Court had to step in and say that, okay, it's okay to teach human evolution. It was even later than that people, I guess in the courts it was decided that we're no longer going to teach creationism, we're only going to teach evolution, and that's I think it was in the 80s that happened. So these things have developed fairly recently here.
Yeah, it has been. It's so easy to take for granted how rapidly things are changing.
Actually, it was. I'm looking at the other case over here. It was Edwards v. Aguilar in 1987. So some of us were, fully formed human beings at that point in time when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on creationism, and I guess it was um, it was some Louisiana law that they were talking about there, and they basically said that it violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment because it was advancing a particular religion, and so creationism became unconstitutional to be taught in schools at that point in time. Um, so it wasn't until up until 87 they could openly teach creationism, in high schools. Not that long ago.
What scares me is that even though that happened, 30 years ago, was when I was substitute teaching. I was substitute teaching at basically 5th grade through 12th grade, and I would regularly come into a classroom and start recognizing little hints, that the teacher was kind of infiltrating the classroom with their particular religion of choice, which of course around here is Christianity. And it bothered me. It honestly bothered me just seeing, how much they could influence the classroom and get away with it. Whether they're hanging crosses or quotes from the Bible or prayers or whatever, all publicly visible to the students. And I was appalled at that. And what even took that further was looking at some of their lesson plans sometimes, or some of the books that they had around, and seeing some of the other types of things they were doing in their classes, the types of materials they're having their students read and do. Many of them would end up being religious to some degree. And what blew my mind was even going so far as to substitute teach for a biology classroom and have the teacher kind of hint in their notes that she wanted me to kind of talk about how unlikely and, basically dang near impossible it is for life to evolve out of nothing.
Yeah.
Abiogenesis, basically. She was trying to get me to emphasize to the students how that was basically impossible, and try to
Wow.
encourage, very subtly, of course, encourage other creation possibilities.
Yeah, we only have about a minute left here, and probably less than that now. And very much related to that is the Kidsmiller v. Dover Area School District trial, and that happened in 2004 when basically this group of people tried to take over the Board of Education there, the local board, and they tried to sneak in some sentences about very subtle things about creationism in the textbooks, and became very interesting. I wish we had more time to talk about it. But for anybody interested, Kidsmiller v. Dover is a great story. There's even documentaries about it and all that. Those some of those religious guys, they're not stopping. They're pushing full forward in any way possible to sneak in some religious education in our schools. But with that said, I think this is a wrap. I think it was a great show, guys. Great topic. I really enjoyed it. And hopefully all of our listeners will join us again next week.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and on meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.
Kidsmiller v. Dover.